Welcome to Radical Self-Forgiveness. I'm Rebecca Harmon, your instructor, and we're on class 3 of our 6-session workshop. This, of course, is based on the book Radical Self-Forgiveness by Colin Tipping. And there's my email, rebeccarscp@gmail.com. I hope that you won't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Let's go ahead and get started with the content in class number 3. So just a quick review. By now, this should be old hat. The textbook, of course, is Radical Self-Forgiveness. There are handouts available for each class, and they are hyperlinked underneath the video here in this YouTube layout. Once again, I'm recording these lectures separately from the live class. The content remains the same, but I'm not recording the students and anything that they're sharing. So these are a little shorter than the actual class sessions, which run 2 hours because we don't have the discussion and the questions in real time. Lastly, I am a licensed spiritual practitioner with CSL Greater Pittsburgh, and they are sponsoring this workshop. And we are offering it to anyone and everyone on a love offering basis, which means we're not requiring you to pay a certain amount, but are graciously and gratefully accepting any offerings that you might want to share with us in appreciation for what you've learned. You can send us a check at CSL Greater Pittsburgh, P.O. Box 365, Sewickley, PA 15143, or you can PayPal us the money, and you can find our link on our website, cslgreaterpittsburgh.org. Whichever way you decide, please do indicate that it is for the self-forgiveness workshop. Thank you. So in our live class, this would be the point when I would ask anyone if they had questions or comments or anything that wasn't clear. I hope that if you've had any questions along the way, that you've taken the opportunity to email me, and hopefully by the time you're hearing this, I've already responded to you and either answered your question or at least had a conversation with you about where to find the answer. And now it's time for our class guided meditation. And so it's time to pause this video. And if you haven't downloaded handout for class 3, it's time to go download that handout and find the link on page 4. The link is here in the word video. The word video is hyperlinked. And when you click on that in your handout, it will open the meditation video that I have selected for us for this class. So pause this video, go enjoy the guided meditation, and come back after you're done. And as with the other guided meditations, I would simply encourage you to be in a place where you can have some solitude and be free from distractions and be sitting in a comfortable environment. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so we dug into guilt and shame in our last class, and you may recall that I said we would finish up shame in this class. So let's recap some of the things that we uncovered last week when we looked at the issue of shame. We know that when we feel shame, we feel worthless, bad. We feel like we don't deserve what we have. Certainly, it's a feeling of being less than. And many times we just feel that we're no good for anyone or anything. We learned that self-loathing is common and that it presents in a range of ways, and from the mild end of vague feelings of worthlessness all the way to severe self-hatred and everything in between. We discussed the fact that unresolved shame can foment and fester and cause all kinds of medical and health problems for us down the road. And we learned that healing shame within ourselves requires that we transform toxic beliefs about ourselves so that they stop poisoning us. Guilt and shame are bad in and of themselves, but they lead to even more complex beliefs about ourselves, beliefs that we're worthless, beliefs that we're inherently bad, that there's no redeeming quality about us, beliefs that we're no good for anyone or any circumstance or situation, a belief that we bring more negative than positive on balance, and a belief that we're not enough that who we are is not enough for anyone or anything. And this can translate into relationships. It can also be a belief about what we bring to the table in a career or a job. So, this graphic is meant to portray this concept of tucking shame away and trying to hide it. So, you see shame in a box within a box. But what's really happening, and the arrow has dotted lines around it because it's not an obvious 1 + 1 = 2. We've got shame all locked up inside ourselves, and we don't think anybody's aware of it. We don't think it's impacting us because we're not thinking about it. We're not giving it any attention. But what's coming out anyway are physical expressions of all of that shame that we're hiding inside of us. And so we see expressions of cancer and heart disease, obesity, autoimmune diseases, and other chronic disease. We see the presentation of mental health challenges like anxiety and depression, obesity, unfulfilled dreams, poverty, isolation. And so while we may think we're locking up shame and hiding it away from being exposed to the light of day, it's seeping out in all of these ways and others and causing us pain and disruption to our otherwise good lives. And so the author, Colin Tipping, wrote about the 5 steps to transform core negative beliefs and free ourselves from that cycle of shame and its toxicity. These 5 steps are: discover, recognize, evaluate, neutralize, and transform. So let's look at discover. We're going to have to go back to the exercises in class 1 and pay attention to those judging voices, our judging self. It will help us identify some of our subconscious beliefs, but we can also identify some of these by watching what shows up for us. And I'll give you an example. Let's say we look back over the past year and we say, 3 times, 3 different neighbors have taken advantage of me. I'm going to stop interacting with my neighbors. They're always taking advantage of me. That's a clue that you may have a deep subconscious belief about neighbors and how they interact with you. What we do know is that the law of attraction holds that we're going to draw to us, we're going to attract to us the people and the circumstances, situations, and the events that line up with what we believe and what we feel that we deserve. And so, in my example of having 3 different neighbors take advantages of us in the past year, we're going to want to look at, did the messages from our childhood plant that belief? Did we hear our parents talking about how neighbors can't be trusted? They always take advantage of you. We should also stop and think about the times we had interactions with other neighbors that didn't result in something that felt like that we were being taken advantage of. So spend some time listening to those judging selves, observing the things that are showing up, especially look for patterns and trends in your life. And then think about what you might identify as a likely belief from this exercise. So that's discover. The next step is to recognize. We know that children grow up hearing a lot of negativity. In fact, some research reports suggest that they hear about 20 negative messages about themselves for every 1 positive message. I mentioned in the previous slide that we may have heard about neighbors taking advantage of us or whatever it is that we are believing and that is showing up for us. Those may be things that we inherited from our family. We're like little sponges when we're growing up. We learn to listen to the adults in our lives. And we very often grow into adulthood with the same biases and the same belief systems. So we need to spend some time journaling and in meditation and thinking about what are some of the things that we heard growing up so that we can identify where the beliefs that we hold today are coming from. And what we have to remind ourselves is that most of us have spent our lives wrongly believing that we knew what kind of person we are based on what other people have said and the way that they have treated us. So we have a lot of deprogramming and backpedaling to do to untangle ourselves from these erroneous beliefs. The third step to transforming toxic shame is to evaluate. So we've got to kind of put the logical lens on our face and look at these things through the lens of logic and not through emotion. In the first class, we did an exercise. In fact, I believe it was exercise 1 where we identified qualities that would describe our true authentic self. So it's important that we stay connected to those and understand who we are and what these qualities that make us up are. And some of these qualities may be qualities that we've been shamed for in the past. I can share an example as a young child. I'm still not the quietest person on the face of the earth. I'm always willing to speak up. I never really was fond of the children should be seen and not heard mantra, which was starting to fall out of favor when I was a young child. But where I lived in rural Ohio, it was still in many corners very much adhered to. The other problem that I had being a loud and boisterous child was that I was female. And if children generically were supposed to be seen and not heard, little ladies were supposed to be prim, proper, and very quiet. And I was none of those things. And so I struggled for many years reconciling my authentic self, which is loud and outspoken and not afraid to say what's on my mind, with these beliefs about female children. And what we have to remember is that if we've been shamed about who we are, it's not our fault. It's the fault of the society or the culture or the people who have sought to shame us. So we have to let go of that guilt around that as well. The next step is the neutralize. Now, I love this quote from Michael Beckwith. And I don't know about you, but I first encountered this quote in the movie The Secret when he shared it. Energy flows where our attention goes. And to neutralize a lot of the shame that we're carrying around, we've got to stop giving it so much attention. We've got to shift our attention and our energy elsewhere. I'm a manager in a healthcare organization and I supervise the work of about 55 different people. And so I very often get the opportunity to do counseling and coaching for people who are struggling at work. And when people come in and they're struggling because they really are miserable at work, but they don't see any options for something else that would pay them what they're making, I go in my drawer and I pull out one of these little notebooks. You can get 4 of these for $1 at the Dollar Tree. And I give them one. And I tell them each morning, I tell them to put it at their desk. And each morning when they come in, to write down 3 things that they appreciate about their job. And then the next morning when they come in, 3 more things, different, has to be different each day. At the end of each week on Friday before they go home, I tell them to review the list that they've made for the week. And on Monday morning when they come back in, before they do anything, I ask them to review the previous week's list of appreciated aspects of their job. This has never failed anytime I've prescribed it. Now, some people have taken this and put it in their desk and never done it, and then it doesn't fail, and they usually end up leaving and taking their misery somewhere else. But to a person, the people who have done this exercise and done it faithfully have turned around their attitude about work. When we're dealing with shame, it's no different. We turn away from the shame and we focus on appreciating ourselves. And I'm going to give you an exercise here in a minute that will help. So, exercise 11 is called making the negative positive. And just like my little exercise with the book here for a job that someone's not liking, we're going to do a journal exercise where we identify one of the core negative beliefs that we've uncovered about ourselves, and we're going to rewrite it as a positive statement. I believe there are several examples in the book. I've shared one of them here. I've been told I am nosy, but I am simply inquisitive and curious about things. which shows that I have a healthy mind. So, what I'd like you to do is pause the video and find just one. You don't have to find a whole bunch of them. Just find one that you feel that you could work with and rewrite that core negative belief that you have about yourself as a positive statement, like we have here in the example. So go ahead and hit pause, do some work on that. And when you've finished, come on back. Okay. I hope you were able to spend some time with at least one core negative belief and work on transforming it by writing it in a positive way. If you wrote it in a journal, that's great. If you didn't, if you wrote it on a piece of paper, I'm going to encourage you to put that piece of paper or write it in another place where you can visit it more often, but put it in a place where you can see it. Put it in a place where you can revisit this statement of positivity that has turned that negative core belief around into something positive. And so the last step in this 5-step process is transform. The author reminds us that the only way to transform our negative beliefs about ourselves and transform, not just neutralize or redirect, but to totally transform them or heal them, is to fully and completely accept ourselves, to accept ourselves as we are, no conditions. And this is not something that happens overnight. It takes hard work and it takes practice. And so I'm going to encourage you to engage regularly in the practice of transforming those negative beliefs into positive ones and accepting yourself fully and completely just as you are. The homework for this week includes exercise 12 on page 110 and exercise 13 on page 114. Healing guilt and shame that we carry around is a journey. There's no pill we can take. There's no surgical intervention that can go in and remove it. We have to dedicate ourselves to the end goal of healing and be committed to getting up every day and putting into practice the tools and techniques that we've learned to transform shame, to neutralize toxic beliefs, to resolve guilt. And when we do, and when we're gentle with ourselves and patient with the process, there is healing, there is hope, there is restoration on the other side. Many of you have likely heard of the Hawaiian statement, ho'oponopono. A lot of law of attraction teachers have shared this over the years. I think it's perfect to introduce the ho'oponopono again in this particular class that's focused on healing guilt and shame. And I think it's great to combine with Louise Hay's mirror work. So the ho'oponopono is simply this 4 statements. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I'm recommending as we work through the guilt and especially the shame in this self-forgiveness workshop that you adopt the Louise Hay method of mirror work while you practice the ho'oponopono. And what I mean by that is in the morning when you get up, look at yourself in the mirror, eye to eye, and speak the ho'oponopono. Say to yourself, as you look yourself in the eye, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Louise Hay could not say enough about the power, the very deep power of mirror work. And I believe in healing guilt and especially transforming the toxicity of shame, that the ho'oponopono in combination with mirror work is a powerful tool to healing. Part 2 of this class will take us into chapter 5, and we will start to dig deep into those 5 stages of radical self-forgiveness that I introduced all the way back in class number 1. You may remember them. The 5 stages are identified as the following: telling the story, feeling the feelings, or I like to say refeeling the feelings, collapsing the story, reframing the story, and integrating the shift. So, when we tell the story, we want to make sure that we stick to the facts. We don't want to add over any layers of spiritual interpretation. We want to simply tell the story. So, if it's self forgiveness, we're going to tell the story about what we did or what we didn't do. We're not going to make excuses. We're going to allow the story to stand, and we're going to allow our inner judge to have his or her say. Step 2, feeling the feelings or refeeling the feelings. We're not going to engage in any spiritual bypass. We're not going to pass it off as negative and inappropriate to feel that way. In other words, if we're angry, we're going to be angry. If we're hurt, we're going to be hurt. We're not going to, and the no spiritual bypass means we're not going to say, well, I wasn't angry because that's not spiritual. I was really just feeling disappointed. If we're angry, we're going to recognize and own and feel the anger. So we want to take the lid off, as he says in the book, and just feel the full expression of feelings. We may need to cry as we process this. We may need to sob. We need to let it all out. We need to express our emotions, not repress them. Because if we repress them long enough, we're going to create situations in our life where we're going to be forced to feel them. So we're going to work through and we're going to feel and refeel all of the feelings surrounding our forgiveness work for ourselves, our self forgiveness. Now, part 3 or stage 3 or step 3, whatever you want to call it, collapsing the story. We're going to ask those inner judges to yield to love. And we're going to open the door. We're going to close the door to criticism and open the door to loving acceptance. We're going to have compassion for ourselves, true compassion. We're going to ask others to do the same. And we're going to make sure that we stay open to accepting their compassion and believing that we deserve it. Compassion for ourselves, empathy for ourselves and the circumstances that we were acting in, they help to reduce the intensity of other emotions, and they're critical to this step. Step 4, reframing the story. Now, a little bit of a caveat. In the first class, I mentioned that you didn't have to have any special skills or abilities to do radical self forgiveness, and that you could even be skeptical and it would still work. I will tell you that I struggle a little bit with this aspect of the process. And I'll explain that a little more as we go along. Step 4, reframing the story, is unique to radical self-forgiveness. You may remember that traditional forgiveness and radical forgiveness share the first 3 steps. When we get to step 4, reframing the story, this is brand new to radical process. So radical forgiveness and radical self-forgiveness, this is a unique step. I think it's a little cumbersome to read in the book. It's a little academic in some ways, I think, which to me means it's a little hard to read. And I mean, you can read the words, but I had to go through and read it multiple times to really wrap my head around what it was saying. In short, the author is suggesting the following. He suggests that there are no victims and there are no perpetrators. He suggests that before we came to earth and incarnated in these physical bodies, as entities, as pre-physical entities, we made agreements with each other for the purpose of learning, and that there are no mistakes or accidents. Now, I'm not sure that I fully embrace this. I'm not saying that it's hogwash. I'm simply being really painfully honest with you and saying I'm struggling with this aspect. And I've been following and a big fan of the radical process for a while. I just struggle to wrap my head around the fact that a lot of the pain that we endure in the world, a lot of the pain that people endure in the world, a lot of the really horrible things that we hear about are things that we as souls agreed to experience or to perpetrate or to stand by and allow to happen. Again, I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm saying as a human being, I struggle with this. And he even admits this can be difficult to wrap our heads around. I struggle wrapping my head around this. But this is step 4 in the radical process. Now, I will tell you that even though I struggle with it, I can still work the radical self forgiveness process and get benefit out of it. So don't give up and run away yet. And let me just go back here. A little bit more explanation on the reframing here. It does not suggest his perspective that we all made these agreements before we came incarnated here in physical bodies. He is not suggesting that we have to continue to expose ourselves to pain and suffering. In other words, we don't have to just keep bending over and taking it, so to speak. But he's presenting it as a tool that we can use to help us move on, because staying rooted in some wrong that was done to us, staying grounded in this, in any injustice, it solves nothing. And so he's presented this reframing, this idea that if we can accept that maybe we made this agreement to experience this, he's saying that this is one way to think about whatever issue it is that we're having, and it allows an opening for us that will facilitate us moving on. And that's really the primary goal. We don't want to stay in our mess, we want to move past it. And so he's suggesting this concept of thinking about it as an agreement that we made on the other side, as a way to allow us an opening so that we can pass through. This allows us to let go of the story about what happened to us, what they did to us, what we did to ourselves, the dumb mistake we made, the opportunity we passed up, whatever it is, and start thinking about it as a what if scenario. If, what if I really did agree to this before I came? And it simply, again, it doesn't mean we have to buy into that, because again, I haven't bought into this all the way yet. But as a tool, I appreciate it. We can approach it, Albert Einstein, famous physicist. He A lot of his greatest discoveries came out of what he called his thought experiments. So we can do this like one of Einstein's thought experiments. We don't have to buy into this 100%. We can say, well, what if I considered that to be a possibility? And we can work this process from that perspective. And then the last step 5, integrating the shift. And this is where we begin to replace the old story and the energy that's all tangled up in that old story with our new interpretation. And the new interpretation is everything is, everything was in perfect order. And so that really puts a hard stop to the repeat loop of, oh, woe is me, life is hard, things are bad, never goes right. It stops that right there. Everything as is as it should be. All is well in the universe, so to speak. I compare this to downloading and updating software. We're just replacing the old with the new. We're updating. We're updating to Microsoft Office 2019 or Microsoft Office 365, whatever the next one is. So that is the process. Now, we're coming to the end of the learning about it, and we're going to really next week do a deep dive into actually doing it. So this week, please read the rest of chapter 4 and all of chapter 5. Think about how you feel about the whole concept of reframing. Finish your work in chapter 4 on guilt and shame, of course. The two exercises that I noted in the earlier slides, exercise 12 and exercise 13. And then spend some time really digging into the 5 stages. Now, in chapter 5, there's a very interesting fictional story. And it's very helpful to understanding the application of the radical self-forgiveness process. It's a little bit of a crazy story, but it's crazy in a way I think that helps teach the concepts that Colin Tipping is trying to teach us. So, trying to find the page here. It's called Susan's Story, and it begins on page 137. So, whatever you do, please read Susan's story. And it's fictional, but if you watch enough TV, you're sure that you've seen this story somewhere before. If you're anything like me, I'm sure I've seen that story on Dateline at least once. Spend some time journaling your thoughts on the concepts that were presented, such as this idea that there are no mistakes and no accidents. I think it's important that we journal and think and ponder about that, because that's really it is radical. It's a radical way to look at the challenges that we've experienced, the pain that we've endured, the mistakes that we've made. So spend some time with your thoughts and with your journal on that idea that there are no mistakes and no accidents. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next class. And of course, I'm always available by email if you have questions or need my help. Take care. Until next time, have a great week.